Hello and welcome to this special show on Doordarshan. I am Taposh Bhattacharya, and in the next half an hour we will be discussing on COP26 and how it has the potential to change the future of mankind. COP26, which begins in Glasgow after a year's delay, will seek to finalize the rules for the 2015 Paris Agreement on climate. And what else can we expect from this? What are on the agenda? Let's find out in this report. Amidst fresh warnings and new evidence suggesting worsening of the climate crisis, negotiators from around the world are assembling in Glasgow, Scotland, to tie up a few loose ends of the Paris Agreement that have remained unresolved for over 2 years. COP26, or the 26th Conference of Parties to UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, which was scheduled to be held last year at the same venue but had to be put off for the first time in its history because of the pandemic. All eyes are on the upcoming gathering in Glasgow, the biggest climate conference since the Paris Summit, which is being seen as crucial in setting worldwide emission targets to slow global warming. The official agenda of the summit is to finalize the rules and procedures for implementation of the Paris Agreement, which was supposed to have been completed by 2018. However, most of the discussion ahead of the meeting have been around an effort to get all the countries to commit to a net zero target. Carbon neutrality is a state in which a country's emissions are compensated either by absorption of greenhouse gases, as is done by trees and forests, or by physical removal of carbon dioxide from atmosphere using futuristic technologies. Net zero is an extremely contentious subject, deeply dividing the developed and the developing countries.
Humanity is battling a global pandemic right now. And this event is a timely reminder that the grave threat of climate change had not disappeared. In fact, climate change is a lived reality for millions around the world. Their lives and livelihoods are already facing its adverse consequences. Friends, for humanity to combat climate change, concrete action is needed. We need such action at a high speed, on a large scale, and with a global scope.
The annual climate change meetings are part of the UN-backed process initiated in the early 90s after the world realized that greenhouse gas emissions were powering a rise in temperature that would slowly make the earth uncomfortable to live in. Over the years, these meetings have had remarkable success in bringing climate change to the top of the global agenda and ensuring that every country has an action plan to tackle climate change. The process has also delivered 2 international agreements, the Kyoto Protocol in 1997 and the Paris Agreement in 2015, aimed at cutting down global emissions. Countries responsible for the climate crisis haven't made good on the previous promises. In fact, according to an international report, most of the developed countries have failed to live up to their promises.
The benefits of tackling the causes of climate change could be that if you reduce air pollution, if you reach the recommendations of WHO in terms of levels for particulate matter 2.5, we could reduce by 80% the number of deaths that are occurring every year due to air pollution. Imagine this represents 5.6 million deaths that could be safe, could be protected. We know very well that climate change is affecting the pillars of our health: food, water, the quality of the air, and shelter. So as you can imagine, all of that will represent a major risk for our health, and therefore we need to invest on adaptation to climate change, on more resilient healthcare facilities and systems, and a more resilient society.
The outcome of these meetings, however, have not matched the scale of the response required. The original objectives in terms of the amount of emission reductions and the principle that would govern the international climate architecture have been diluted severely. Most industrialized countries have failed to deliver on their initial promises, not just on emission reductions, but also on their commitments to help with finance and technology. As a result, the climate crisis has worsened in the last 20 years, manifesting itself in more frequent and intense extreme weather events. Despite the shortcomings, however, these meetings remain the best bet to put the world on a path away from climate disasters.
Climate change is a defining issue confronting humanity right now. The impact of climate change are being felt globally. The need of the hour is a comprehensive set of action within socio-economic and developmental contexts to deal with the issue of climate change. Concerted actions are needed in terms of cooperation between all countries, especially with developed countries taking a lead in climate action through mitigation, adaptation, and providing support to developing countries in terms of climate finance, capacity building, and technology transfer. The recently released report by Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change (IPCC) has should alarm bells louder than ever, and it is a clarion call for all the developed countries to undertake immediate deep emission cuts.
Earlier, ministers of 24 nations or the like-minded developing countries groups denounced the efforts to force a net zero target on everyone, saying it went against equity and climate justice. India is part of a like-minded developing countries, and so is China. The other members include Indonesia, Malaysia, Iran, Bangladesh, the Philippines, and Sri Lanka. It is clear that discussions on net zero are also likely to lead to some heated debates in Glasgow. India's main contention at the summit will continue to revolve around the transfer of technology and climate finance from developed to developing country. Among key issues at the summit will be climate fair share, climate ambitions, climate finance, loss and damage leverage, and carbon markets. India's stand on loss and damage due to climate change will be that developed countries have a bigger contribution in environmental damage and resultant calamities that have taken place in developing countries, in particular the island nations.
We in India are doing our part. Our ambitious renewable energy target of 450 gigawatts by 2030 shows our commitment. Despite our development challenges, we have taken many bold steps on clean energy, energy efficiency, afforestation, and biodiversity. That is why we are among the few countries whose NDCs are 2 degrees Celsius compatible. We have also encouraged global initiatives like International Solar Alliance, LEAD IT, and the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. Friends, as a climate responsible developing country, India welcomes partners to create templates of sustainable development in India. This can also help other developing countries who need affordable access to green finance and clean technology.
Indian delegation will consist of an inter-ministerial team with officials from new and renewable energy, power, earth sciences, agriculture and finance ministries. According to international report, India's annual per capita carbon emission is 1.96 tons per person against China's 8.4 tons per person. Other big emitters include US, which has 18.6 tons per person, and the European Union with 7.16 tons per person. The world average is 6.64 tons per person. India's nationally determined contribution or NDC are ambitious and they make a significant contribution towards achieving the temperature goals of the Paris Agreement. India has achieved reduction of 24% in emission intensity of its GDP between 2005 and 2016, thereby achieving its pre-2020 voluntary target. 53.7 million ton of CO2 emissions have reduced due to adoption of supercritical units in India. As per the Kigali Amendment, India will complete its phase down of the HFCs in 4 steps from 2032 onwards, with cumulative reduction of 85% of the production and consumption in 2047. Union Cabinet has also approved the ratification of the Kigali Amendment by India. India is working on a national strategy for phasing down HFCs by 2023. The non-fossil fuel-based energy capacity. Globally, India stands 4th in terms of installed renewable energy capacity, 4th in terms of wind installed capacity, and 5th in terms of solar installed capacity. India's current renewable energy capacity is about 147 gigawatts, which is about 37.8% of the country's total capacity. India's non-fossil fuel-based installed capacity is 153.88 gigawatt, which is around 39.64% of the total installed capacity. India's annual renewable energy addition has been exceeding that of the coal-based thermal power since 2017. In the last 6 to 7 years, India's installed renewable energy capacity has increased by more than 250%. In the last 6 years, India's installed solar energy capacity has increased 15 times and stands at about 45 gigawatt as on date. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has further announced the aspirational target of renewable energy capacity of 450 gigawatt by 2030.
India is committed, consistent to the United Nations Framework Convention of Climate Change and Paris Agreement, and I am hopeful for successful and balanced outcome of COP26. India has taken several actions under the visionary leadership of our Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi to tackle climate change by taking several initiatives including inter alia implementation of National Action Plan of Climate Change, National Adaptation Fund on Climate Change, PRADHAN UJJWALA YOJANA, faster adoption and manufacturing of electric vehicles in India scheme, setting up of International Solar Alliance, coalition of disaster resilient infrastructure, leadership group of industry transition and putting in place an ambitious national hydrogen mission and continuing effort to decouple its emission from economic growth. India has an aspirational target in installing 450 gigawatt of renewable energy by 2030. Indian Railways has set a target to becoming net zero carbon emitter by 2030. At the same time, ambitious climate action in developing countries is dependent on enhanced support from developed countries under the Paris Agreement. India has repeatedly called upon the developed countries to fulfill their promise of USD 100 billion per year goal. In this regard, COP26 should focus on climate finance in scope, scale and speed, along with development and transfer of technologies and capacity building support. Developing countries are highly vulnerable to climate change impact. India's large population is dependent on climate sensitive sector and their livelihood. The fight against climate change cannot be undertaken by the government alone. Private sector companies should be encouraged in developing breakthrough technologies and mobilizing finance. Equity and climate justice are the touchstone of any global climate response. Mechanisms such as long-term strategies and global stake have to duly account for adaptation, finance, technology and equity consideration.
International Solar Alliance, launched in 2015, is Prime Minister's vision to bring clean and affordable energy within the reach of all and enhance international collaboration with countries having solar potential. So far, 98 countries have signed the framework agreement of International Solar Alliance, with 80 of them ratifying it. India has announced the National Hydrogen Mission for generating hydrogen from green energy sources. The mission aims to produce 1 million tons of green hydrogen annually by 2030. India's forests have increased by 15,000 square kilometers in the last few years. Under National Mission for a Green India, an area of 76,117 hectares have been covered and alternate fuel energy has been provided to 56,319 households between 2015 and 2019. India's total forest and tree cover, as reported in India's State of the Forest Report 2019, stands at 8,07,276 square kilometers, which is 24.56% of the total geographical area of the country. The total carbon stock in country's forest is estimated to be 7,124.6 million tons, showing an increase of 42.6 million tons compared to previous assessment of 2017. India is one of the 16 member countries of the Electric Vehicle Initiative, a multi-government policy forum dedicated to accelerating the introduction and adoption of electric vehicles worldwide. India has leapfrogged Bharat Stage 4 to Bharat Stage 6 emission norms by April 1st, 2020, which was earlier to be adopted by 2024. MANTRI UJJWALA YOJANA to provide rural households with clean cooking fuel and has benefited 80 million households with LPG connections. Almost $1.1 billion has been allocated towards implementation of the scheme. The scheme has been extended to 10 million more beneficiaries. As a future step, Apex Committee for Implementation of the Paris Agreement has been set up in October 2020 to oversee the progress in implementation of India's NDC and monitor, review and revisit climate goals and regulate carbon markets in the country. More than the lack of adequate action on emission reductions, the developed countries have been found wanting in their commitment to help and support developing countries, especially the least developed ones, in dealing with impacts of climate change.
In April, I announced the United States will double our public international financing to help developing nations tackle the climate crisis. And today, I'm proud to announce that we'll work with the Congress to double that number again, including for adaptation efforts. This will make the United States a leader in public climate finance, and with our added support, together with increased private capital and from other donors, we'll be able to meet the goal of mobilizing $100 billion to support climate action in developing nations.
We need all countries, every single one of you, to step up and commit to very substantial reductions by 2030. And I'm absolutely convinced, I passionately believe, that we can do it by making commitments in 4 areas. And I want you to remember them: coal, cars, cash, and trees. Coal, cars, cash, and trees.
This included providing money and technology to facilitate adaptation to the changing environment, something that the developed countries are mandated to do not just under Kyoto Protocol but also in the Paris Agreement regime. But hardly any meaningful amount of money or transfer of technology took place. If the international community is serious about helping developing countries to decarbonize and manage the impact of climate change, they must be prepared to pay. India will not just be a leader for the developing countries, but also for those whose voices are not being heard. While the developed countries claim that this sum has already started flowing, Developing countries say there is very little money on offer and that a lot of what is being dressed as climate finance is actually pre-existing aid or money flowing for other purposes. Besides, $100 billion now seems like a paltry amount when estimates suggest that trillions of dollars are required in climate finance every year. The main talks, which take place for 2 weeks from October 31st to November 12th, will bring together world leaders, scientists, businesses and civil society groups. Climate summits have so far failed to hold countries accountable, but COP26 could be a chance to bridge some trust. The world would be eagerly looking to India to provide leadership in the summit. That's all in this special program. I take your leave, but don't go anywhere as lots more lined up on the other side. Keep watching Doordarshan.